Hey everyone, welcome to the World View. Today we're discussing a critical analysis of the ongoing situation in the Middle East, focusing on Israel's policies under Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. As many of you know, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict has been a long-standing issue with deep-rooted complexities. Recently, things have escalated to alarming levels, raising serious concerns about the future stability of the region. One voice that stands out in this debate is Professor John Mearsheimer, a highly respected political scientist known for his expertise in international relations. Mearsheimer has been very vocal about the dangers of Netanyahu's current policies, arguing that they are not only harmful to the Palestinians, but could also lead Israel down a destructive path. Personally, I think Professor Mearsheimer is absolutely right. If Netanyahu continues on this trajectory, it seems inevitable that the region will face a larger war. And this isn't just about the Middle East. A conflict of this scale would have global repercussions. We're talking about potential destruction that could ripple out, affecting the global economy, causing inflation, and impacting businesses worldwide. The stakes are incredibly high, and it's crucial that we pay attention to these warnings. Now, let's take a look at what Professor Mearsheimer has to say in this clip.
Post-Cold War policy has done a lot of damage around the world. I think when you go back to the forever wars and the global war on terrorism, you see that after September 11th, we caused unending trouble around the world and got ourselves into a whole heck of a lot of trouble in places like Iraq and Afghanistan. And more recently, we basically played, I think, the key role in precipitating the Ukraine war, which is a disaster. And now we're not only involved up to our eyeballs in the Ukraine war, but we're involved up to our eyeballs in the Gaza genocide. We have supported the Israelis hook, line, and sinker as they've executed this genocide. Furthermore, the war has escalated beyond Gaza to include a conflict between Israel and Hezbollah that we worry about getting sucked into, to include a conflict between Iran and Israel that we actually got sucked into on April 14th when we actually were in combat against Iranian forces, missiles, cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, and drones. And there is a real danger where we get sucked back into a conflict between Iran and Israel. So we live in a very dangerous world, and we, of course, have played a key role in creating this world. And we have had lots of opportunities to tamp down the violence and to avoid conflicts, and we hardly ever take advantage of those opportunities. Well, I believe he's a disaster for Israel. I think it's in Israel's interest to certainly shut down the war with Gaza, or the war with the Palestinians in Gaza, as soon as possible. And I believe that would put an end to the conflict with Hezbollah, or at least put that conflict on the back burner, which is in Israel's interest. And furthermore, I think if Israel were smart, they would work out some sort of meaningful modus vivendi with the Palestinians over time. It's not clear that's possible anymore, in large part because of the policies that Netanyahu has been pursuing over the years. But Israel has a deep-seated interest in working out some sort of deal, some sort of arrangement with the Palestinians, putting an end to the conflict with Hezbollah. And furthermore, Netanyahu has a penchant for picking a fight with Iran. He wants, indeed, to drag the United States and Iran into a war. He's tried twice now to precipitate that war. This is not in our interest, and I believe it's not in Israel's interest. So if you look at all these conflicts that Israel is in, you look at the damage that's being done to Israel's economy and the fact that it looks like this damage is going to continue to occur because he's not going to put an end to the war in Gaza, you see that Israel is in really serious trouble. Yeah, I think it's clear that Prime Minister Netanyahu does not want a ceasefire. It's interesting. Tony Blinken recently was in the Middle East, and all the headlines advertised the fact that after talking to the Israelis, including Netanyahu, Blinken pronounced that Israel accepted the deal, the bridging proposal that the Americans had put on the table for creating a ceasefire. But if you read those articles carefully, in the articles, a couple paragraphs down, it invariably says that Netanyahu did not accept the bridging proposal. He's not in favor of a ceasefire. So Blinken is saying something that, in my opinion, is patently untrue. He's either delusional or he's lying. I think we should now refer to Tony Blinken as Netanyahu's lawyer. I think that would be an accurate representation of the relation. By definition, it's a racist state. Israel is clearly an apartheid state. Despite the fact that its supporters here in the West recoil at that label. Yeah, I mean, that is commonplace. Israel supporters basically like to make the argument that it's a flawed liberal democracy. In my opinion, this is not a serious argument. An apartheid state cannot be a flawed liberal democracy. An apartheid state is a racist state. And as I've said a number of times in public, there are three major reports done by three of the most prominent human rights organizations in the world: Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, and B'Tselem, which is an Israeli human rights organization, that have all written lengthy reports that make the case in a comprehensive and compelling way that Israel is an apartheid state. And just to take this a step further, Judge, it's very important to understand that this apartheid state is executing a genocide. And at the same time, the United States is joined at the hip with Israel. We support Israel unconditionally. This is crazy from America's point of view. And in my humble opinion, it is not good for Israel for 1 second. And I think this is why a lot of people think that Israel's future is so bleak. I wouldn't go so far as to say that Israel is going to disappear from the map, but Israel is in real trouble. And as you look forward, that trouble just grows and grows and grows. And I think the military understands, as hard as this might be to believe, that Netanyahu is the most popular politician in Israel at the time. So if they were to remove him, they would be removing a very popular prime minister. And this would not be a smart thing to do. So I think it is likely that if he were replaced by someone like Bennett, that he would work out a ceasefire arrangement in Gaza. I think there are all sorts of people in the security community and outside of Netanyahu's circle who think it's time to have a ceasefire in Gaza. But in terms of how that new replacement, or how that replacement for Netanyahu, that new prime minister, would act towards the Palestinians in general, I think there would be hardly any change at all. I'm actually surprised. After the assassination, which you want to remember was on July 31st, that was a long time ago.
Right.
If you listen to the Iranians talk, they were talking about a massive attack, and that massive attack was going to happen soon. But obviously, there's been no attack at all, as you said. And that, I think, is surprising to almost everybody. Now, the Iranians are saying, don't worry, we will attack at some point, and it will be at a time of our choosing. And they point out, and others point out, that this works to Iran's advantage because it keeps the Israelis on their toes, keeps them in a state of fear, and it has economic consequences for Israel. Airlines are very reluctant to send planes flying into Israel when there's a possibility that the Iranians will launch a missile strike against the airfields that they land at. So one could argue that this is a smart strategy from the Iranian point of view. But whether that's true or not, it is surprising that they didn't attack. They haven't attacked so far. The Iranians mobilize the assets they're going to use against Israel. But the fact is, the Iranians have done nothing in that regard. So there's been nothing for the Mossad or for the Israeli intelligence forces to see. So I don't think they're missing anything here. I want to make one other point. We were talking about how much trouble Israel is in. Over all the years that I've followed Israel, one of its most important claims was that it could defend itself. Yes, it needed to buy weaponry from the United States or to be given weaponry by the United States. But when it came to fighting against its adversaries, it could do it alone. It was a sovereign state, if I can use that term. If you look at what's going on with regard to how Israel will deal with an Iranian attack, should it come, and how Israel dealt with the Iranian attack on April 14th, it's very clear that the Israelis need the United States, and they need the United States in a big way. And they not only need the United States, because once they bring in the United States, they bring in some European states as well, like the British and the French. They bring in the Jordanians, they bring in the Saudis, and it's a collective effort. Now, one can say this is a good thing because Israel's able to work with other countries. Okay. But the real problem is if you're Israel, you don't want to be in a situation where you're dependent on any other country in the crunch. And this includes the United States. And for a long time, this was one of the central planks of Israeli security policy, this sense of independence. But it has really gone away. And it just shows you how much of a game changer all these missiles are that have proliferated in the Middle East and are now in the hands of the likes of Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, and the Iranians. I've argued for many years now that that train has left the station. There are just too many settlers in the West Bank and East Jerusalem to begin with. And furthermore, if you look at the political center of gravity inside of Israel, since you and I were young, that center of gravity has moved steadily toward the right. And if you project out into the future, it's going to move even further to the right. When I was young and you were young, the idea that somebody like Ben-Gvir or Smotrich would be in an Israeli cabinet was almost unthinkable. It was unthinkable.
Right.
It's not possible. And in fact, if anything, the state would have had its gun sights on those guys and have gone to great lengths to make sure that they didn't cause any unnecessary trouble. But those days are gone. They now have the car keys, and they're not going away. They're going to become more powerful politically as time goes by. And the people who should worry the most about this are the Palestinians. You really want to think about what the future holds for the Palestinians who live inside Greater Israel, given where the political center of gravity inside Israel is headed, and given what the Israelis have just done since October 7th.